Hi, class. This is a follow-up to our the reading and podcast we listened to on active imagination. Sorry, it's a little bit late. This is actually I've tried to record this a few times. I have my children almost all the time right now, which is part of why I am not teaching in a regular situation. Had I sent you the other versions of this recording, you would find they were heavily interrupted by my children. So this is going to be a not too long kind of overview of active imagination, stuff that you've already, if you did listen to the podcast and the YouTube video by that Robert Johnson speaking, which I know was kind of weird because it has this like music under it, which is some people like and some people don't. I'm a music lover, but it's for me, it doesn't work too well. But anyways, hopefully you've got the gist of that. As just a very good introduction to active imagination, and that, like, I don't know, I think it was maybe 10 minutes or something from Robert Johnson, who is one of the people, the Jungian analysts, who has really made active imagination available for people to learn about on their own, and really brought it into something very accessible through the book Inner Work. That is what I recommended to you all. If you want to get a little more of a sense of how to do this on your own, that's a short book and it's very helpful. And then the podcast was 3 Jungian analysts who gave a little bit more of a deep dive into active imagination from an analyst perspective and from a personal perspective as well. And they also did a little bit of analysis, a dream analysis using active imagination. So my approach is Jungian influence. I mean, it's a Jungian concept, and my training is Jungian, but I am not a therapist and I am not a trained analyst by any stretch. I use Jungian concepts to explicate mythology and cultures. So when I teach active imagination, or when I use it, it is not, it's really meant, I don't do it on you. As the analysts we're talking about their method, it's more of using it with their patients and drawing it out. My interest is more, I use it to explicate symbols I find in culture. I use it on my own in meditation and even dream analysis, and I maybe teach other people how to do it. I am not the most highly trained person on this topic, but it is actually fairly easy to grasp if you get the basic concept. And then it's a matter of just working with it and seeing how you can best enter it and finding what kind of way resonates with you. Sorry, it's the end of the day. And as I said, I've tried to record this multiple times today and the other day. And whew, mom brain is a real thing. So without further ado, let's just jump into some basics. I'm not going to go over what you learned in the podcast or on the YouTube video. If you have questions on the basic concepts, you can jump back in there. I will just highlight some of the things I think are most important to know about active imagination, which are, first off, that primarily what it is an attempt to connect your rational mind, kind of your rational mind, and almost more creative, irrational mind, which is, there's it's difficult to route those things together so you can have some sort of like analytical approach to these very creative, kind of emotional, unconscious states. So active imagination is an attempt to do that. And another way to talk about it is it's an attempt to bring the conscious and the unconscious, to use very Jungian terms, together. So it's a way of using the conscious mind, the consciousness, to look at the unconscious mind. As we've talked about in class, from a Jungian perspective, the unconscious mind harbors a lot of things that affect us deeply, both as individuals and as culture. So there are always things operating under the surface that have a very strong influence in the way that we live out our daily lives, both collectively and individually. Again, the unconscious is where the shadow self is. Again, there's a collective and an individual aspect of that. This kind of term is getting a lot of usage in culture today. I don't agree with all of the way people are using it, but it is originally a Jungian term and a Jungian concept of this idea of the shadow in our unconscious. And that's a place that holds things that we have largely repressed for one reason or another, but they still continue to affect us. Because again, repression is not really effective long-term. Repression, because it's just it's pressurized, in some sense, it's going to come back up. So that sort of thing stays in the unconscious, stays or in the shadow aspect of the unconscious. And active imagination is one way that you can start to talk to those things and talk to the symbols and the concepts and the the complexes, as Jung would talk about, and like in the unconscious way, bringing it to the conscious mind and integrating it. So that's where we're really headed when we use active imagination, is integration, becoming a more whole and complete self. And that is the path towards what Jung calls individuation. Individuation is the basically the greatest achievement, the greatest thing you can achieve as a human. Certainly doesn't think that most or maybe even many people achieve true individuation. But to be individuated means that you have a true awareness of yourself. You have your psyche is, it's kind of integrated and whole, and you know yourself. When Jung did the Red Book, one of his most famous works for sure, and famous kind of projects, his attempt was really to know his unconscious mind, and he used a lot of active imagination in that process. So that was his attempt to kind of kickstarting, successful, not just an attempt, kickstarting, really generating this discussion with the unconscious that comes up through amplifying symbols, which you do through active imagination. So the point is to know ourselves better, to become healthier, to understand our own behaviors and our own, fears and drives more clearly. And we do that through basically having, it is a dialogue. You're trying to find symbols in your unconscious that represent something that's a very deep-seated for you, or that influences you in a way that you don't understand or maybe you're even aware of, and then talk to it. And the idea is that that these things can come out of the unconscious and actually give you information if you can find this right flow where you are essentially personifying it and then engaging it like it's another thing. Personification is a huge thing in depth psychology and myth. I hear my children. I'll be right back. Okay, so we are back with my daughter sitting next to me reading. So active imagination. So one of the things that I think in the podcast, it was an interesting kind of way of looking at it. One of the analysts talked about how active imagination is kind of like snorkeling in the unconscious. Like you are still in your own world, your own regular world, but you get to dive into somewhere that is like the underneath, something that's a little bit foreign to you let's see. Okay, so back after a few minutes away. My kids are now in the room with me, and sorry for the chaos. So active imagination, trying to get my head in the right space. You look at my little notes on my phone. So the Jungian term that they mentioned in the podcast that is often used with active imagination and other things is turning a friendly face to the unconscious. So it's this idea that the unconscious is alive and kind of full of characters. It's kind of got a cast of characters of some sort, and aspects that can really be enlivened, that are alive, and that can tell you a lot about yourself and your unconscious. So when we are doing active imagination, the main point is to find, this is why I also have called it a symbol amplification. So the point is to find a symbol and sort of breathe life into it, enough that it comes, it like wakes up on its own. And then what you will find, and this seems out there, or sort of like something that happened while you're on like hallucinogenic drugs, but it actually does really work for most people. And I'd say for many people, even fairly easily, that you can start to interact with a symbol when you kind of just have the the expectation and the willingness to let it come alive on its own. So if you were to take a symbol from a dream, and this is how dream analysis is done largely. So take a dream, like a dream you have, the more significant or recurrent, usually the more potent the symbol is. And then you start to breathe, like just start to breathe life. That's not a Jungian term, it's kind of my own terminology, but you start to let it come alive in its own by sort of relaxing into this space where your conscious and your rational mind is a little more relaxed. It's very similar, I would say, to the state that you have when you're kind of starting to fade off to sleep, or if you're in this like just very aware state, like if you're walking in the woods and you just almost feel like the trees are kind of communicating with you. Please be quiet up here, okay? Thank you. So it's that kind of same state where you're not as ticked into your rational mind. And of course, in our culture, in our day-to-day, we have our rational mind turned on very strongly most of the time. And so this can be a challenge mostly in that it's uncomfortable. It's that we're not used to it. So this is an interesting way to quiet your thinking mind. It's not quite meditation, but in some ways it's akin to meditation. It certainly can be, in my experience, complementary to a meditative state. So what you would do is take a symbol. So if you were to choose a dream, I think one of the first times I did a major symbol amplification from a dream, active imagination, I took a dream I had about a cave. Now, I think this is a pretty good example because this dream, my first attempt, I'd just started graduate school, and one of my first professor of my first class, a man named Dr. Walter Odeinik, who's a brilliant Jungian analyst who passed away almost 10 years ago. But I had the fortune of learning from him before he did. And he kind of gave us these vague guidelines on how to do this, and gave us Robert Johnson's book, or, had us buy Robert Johnson's book. And it's essentially like the basic understanding too is with symbols. The reason that dream analysis, for instance, and other sort of symbol amplification is not just super straightforward. While things like dream dictionaries have a utility because there is some archetypal quality, like there is a universal quality, but at the same time, they will have a very specific relevance to us. What a symbol is exactly, what a cave is to me is not exactly what a cave is to you. What a tree is to me is not exactly what a tree is to you. A tree, it does have archetypal significance. A cave is always kind of an underworld symbol. A tree is always a maternal symbol. But how that really shows up and what it tells me about my unconscious, or if we're using myth, what it tells you about the unconscious of that culture. Please talk quietly, my sweeties. Is going to be really specific to that culture or to your mind and that landscape, because it's very influenced by your factors. So the archetypal factor of being a maternal symbol. Please be a little bit quiet. Thank you. My kids are 3 and 4 years old. They're still learning to share, aren't we always? So it'll have like that general archetypal quality. You can probably assume it's related with the tree to something maternal for you. However, the particular thing is telling you about what that tree represents in your own unconscious is going to be specific through how you understand the symbol. So if you were to sit with an analyst, they would help you to understand that symbol in your own inner life. You're going to sit with yourself. You need to kind of start to use that same space in your mind where you're going into this almost flow state. Think of trying to get to that state between sleep and waking. And this is not something I've heard an analyst say, but this is my impression. And this is what works for me. And just kind of sit with it. Like what comes to you. And Jung is really big on like the feeling, like what you feel around something. So if I were to dream of a tree, or when I did dream of a cave, and then I'm trying to understand what that cave is to me, the first important factor is that the cave seems significant. Just simply seems significant. Hold on. We'll see how this goes. So the first thing is that it's significant to you. The cave is significant to me. It just feels that way. I don't know. I'm not rationalizing it. This is not the rational mind. This is very much more emotional or even somatic, like just feeling in the body. Then from there, when I start to sit with the cave in an almost meditative, again, way, I'm not talking going into a deep meditation. Isla Faye, baby, you can sit with me if you want, but we need to be quiet. So you're going into this deeper state and you start to think of what comes to you. That's the meaning of the cave. And in some ways, when you start doing this, the further out there that it is, the more kind of left field that your meaning might be. And this you can even just chart. You can like, let's see if I can just move myself a little bit. Okay, so an effective way to do this for me, that does employ the analytical mind a little bit, but or the rational mind at least, like is to start to list things. So you can actually start to write down a list of what it means to you. And even if it's random, you got to just put it down. You can't, random is good. Random probably means that it's coming from somewhere more meaningful, not necessarily. And then the way you define or the way you like determine whether it's more in your kind of list of meaningful symbols is the feeling. When I say, so I write cave, and then I might have several things in it that's just like cave, darkness, rock. Sure, that can all go on the list. But then, put everything down on your list that you just start brainstorming. This is like just brainstorming, free flow, stream of consciousness kind of thing. Rock, darkness. And then, so for me, I started working with cave. This is quite a long time ago now, but then I wrote like, Plato's cave, allegory of the cave, maybe some piece of my childhood. So I said something like cafeteria or something, that's kind of stuff. And you just writing it all down. And then when we come back through the list, think about which things have evoke feeling for you and circle those. So what came up for me is that, and then if you're an artistic person, you can render this or if I don't consider myself particularly skilled in art, but if you have any, feel some level of comfort or like that's a place that you explore well, certainly you can do it through writing, but because writing tends to be so caught up with the analytical mind, that can be tough. But if you want to just get out your watercolors, like I use my kids watercolors, no pressure. This isn't going on the wall of a museum, just kind of start to draw out for me, my cave, and just let it really try to flow. So you might find that you add colors or you add figures. This is one way you can do it. That will start to bring it a little more alive for you. I don't know that that's really traditional active imagination, but it's one way to just start giving the symbol some life. Well, the more traditional way, so I would recommend doing that. And I think it definitely stays in it stays true to the meaning and to the technique of active imagination. The other option is just to kind of sit with it in a meditative space. You can even skip doing the writing down. That's just a one way you can start to enter. Eileen, do you want to sit with me, honey, and just be quiet for a minute? I'm sorry, this is a little glimpse into my real personal life. So you can you can also just sit in a meditative state and find this way of envisioning, essentially. So a lot of times people will do something like actually sit in a chair and bring another chair across from them and then invite the symbol to the chair. So whether it's the actual cave or it might be some sort of personage that represents the cave as a similar symbolic root, or whatever shows up for you. And that's the part that gets a little bit out there, is that things will show up that will not make sense. And you absolutely have to just let those flow. So once you start to say, this doesn't make sense, you're going to kick yourself right out of the process. So you can't go there. I mean, you can come back in, but so you can't go there, but you will no longer be in the process once you start having that line of thought. So you just have to go with it. I mean, I think you can just suspend your disbelief by saying, I'll just try it. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but I'll just try it. And what you'll often find is that when you start to bring something up like this cave, talk to me, tell me what's going on. Your eyes may be open, your eyes may be closed. I have done both. I have a really wild imagination, so I can do this fairly easily with my eyes open. I think a lot of people probably benefit from having their eyes closed, and I've certainly had very, very strong, powerful, active imagination with my eyes closed. And then you would just sort of merge the space of imagination and symbol with your real world. Like if you're sitting in this chair and you're imagining the symbol or the personage right across from you, then you're just sort of letting them be as though they're there. So you use your imagination in a very active way. This is not daydreaming. This is not really just letting whatever, but it's kind of conjuring up. So if there was the example they gave in the podcast, I think there was one of the analysts talked about an old man in his dream, and intruder, and he'd had a negative experience with this intruder in his dream. And then once he used active imagination, he was able to dialogue with that dream figure. And he asked the intruder to sit down. That came from his dream, totally made up in the dream. Sit down and started to say, "Why are you here?" And these are the main questions that you start to ask questions. Pretty open-ended, usually I would say to begin with, though I can also say the conversation can get very detailed. So there's why, who are you? Why are you here? Do you have something to tell me? What would you like me to know? These are the kinds of questions you might ask the symbol or the personage or personification. And sometimes it's not easy maybe, but sometimes we can do this with an actual symbol like a cave or a tree. Sometimes that might morph into something else. It might morph into more of a face or something like that. And that's very normal as well. So the point is just to let it do what it's going to do and try to really honor that this is a figure that has information. So although it's coming from you, there's also an aspect of it accessing a part of you that you cannot typically access. So once you're doing this dialoguing, you are actually dialoguing with the unconscious from a Jungian perspective. I will say that I think that it is very true. It's very effective. And that it actually, most people, like I said, can get there pretty quickly and will suddenly find themselves having, and I should, maybe not quickly. Most people can get there. It may take you longer or not, and that's fine. Everyone's just different. But I think most people can get there if they can open their mind to it. And the conversations that you might have, and these are conversations, they do not have to be out loud, but they do have to be sort of really clearly verbalized, at least in your head, and then listen for the response. So it's not like you're giving space for both sides, yourself and the other side. And I would try and stay in it. You can take notes if you need to during the process. If it's going on a long time, I would generally recommend just trying to stay in the flow and take notes immediately after you're done. So have a notebook and paper and just sit down, pick a dream, pick a symbol, whatever just speaks to you. It might be hard. You maybe don't remember your dreams. Maybe it's hard to pick something. If you don't remember your dreams, you can take a symbol often from nature is a good thing. Maybe an interesting door you saw that caught your attention while you were wandering in the city. Maybe a bridge that you crossed, a beautiful tree that you stopped to look at while you were on a hike. Things like that are absolutely anything that just made you kind of have this feeling of like awe or even fear. Those would all be good options. If something you're working with is not working, try again with a different thing. If that's not working, take a break from both and maybe try again when you're in a more relaxed state. And you do want to try to do anything kind of meditative or breathing technique to really calm yourself. I'm sorry about this. It's the only way I can get this to you. Yeah, and then just allow for the conversation to go on as long as you are comfortable, as it is working, and as you want to. And I have definitely had to cut off active imaginations at a certain point when I'm kind of tapped out or exhausted. And I do personally, I try to show respect. I try to just let them know, like, I'm tired now. I don't think I can take any more conversation. Could we meet again? That kind of thing seems weird, but you get used to it. So you can, I would say it makes sense. Again, this is a part of yourself, even if it's a scary or potentially unwanted part, it's still important to understand that you're kind of all living under the same roof. Oh my goodness. It's okay. Knocked over my table. So obviously getting a little chaotic in my office here. That's pretty much all I have to tell you. I do think that you want to write it down right away after you're done with the process. And that's because just much like a dream, you'll forget. And you might not think it because you are conscious and all of that, but it actually does fade quickly. Write it down. You'll have that to look at, and then you'll have the kind of reminder of the exercise. So I know that this was supposed to get to you sooner. Again, I'm sorry. I have to go now. I look forward to seeing you all on Tuesday to review this, and we will be doing something else with active imagination. Please, children. But I hope you can give this a try over the weekend or before Tuesday. Do you guys want to come and wave to this? Come here, say hi as long as you're throwing balls around. Come here. And if you have any questions, as always, please email me. And here you can see my beautiful children. This is my son, Emerson. He's, how old are you, honey?
4.5.
4.5 years old. And this is, I can't remember if they popped up on the recording already this time or not. And who are you? What's your name?
Isla.
Isla. And how old are you?
3.
She's 3 years old. Okay. You're very sweet. Thank you all. I'll see you on Tuesday. Thanks for your understanding with this unusually hectic week. Take care.